Okay. Okay. All right. Welcome everyone. Just a few things before we get started that I want to share, and then Dr. Rob will introduce our speaker for this session. You all are in for a treat for sure. Um, so I'll start off by just reminding you that you are in the session of Laila Aziz, Pillars of the Community, Policing, Policy, and Mass Incarceration. And we want to first acknowledge your presence and thank you for being here. We're grateful to continue our conference through this virtual platform and appreciate your attendance. Land acknowledgement is something that we're practicing in every session. So just to acknowledge the land, San Diego City College acknowledges that our campus is built on Kumeyaay indigenous homelands. We recognize the Kumeyaay people, past and present, and their land with honor and gratitude. We also want to inform you that this session is being recorded and archived. Later in the session, you may be asked to turn on your videos or unmute to ask any questions. In doing so, you're consenting to being recorded. You're also free to keep your video off if you'd like as well. Safe spaces. The Sankofa Committee, in conjunction with the San Diego City College Social Justice and Education Conference, is committed to creating a space and community that values a collective vision of justice and equity. We aim to amplify voices that have been marginalized as means to reimagine and enact a more representative and equitable future. Our intent for this conference is to collaboratively build a safer and more inclusive space for our communities. In doing so, we must uphold certain values that leave no space for harmful and disrespectful behavior. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and other forms of violence do not have a place at this conference. In order for this conference to sustain its mission as an event that collectively fosters and inspires the role of social justice in our lives, we must also hold ourselves accountable if we make mistakes. This community includes all of us, and it must be sustained by all of us. You will be asked to leave and remove this session if you do not uphold and practice these values during the session. So all that, which I think most of us in the space know, but we're excited to have Laila Aziz share her stories and expertise today. And just quickly, we will share a link to survey for the conference, along with information on Think Dignity to donate through the chat. Dr. Rob will introduce our speaker today.
Whoop, whoop. Yes, thank you so much, Professor Tyree, for all of those important details. And I have the honor of introducing one of my incredible colleagues at Pillars of the Community. She is a pillar of the community. She is an incredible activist. She is really behind the scenes of so many things that happen in Southeast San Diego, and it just uplifts so many of our amazing community members. I've seen Laila in action, and she is like no all in when something's going down. When there's when there's an injustice happening, you see Laila not just standing on the sidelines. You see her in, you know, on the ground. Being really just sorry, I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that she's like on the ground. She's calling for action. So I just love seeing all of the beautiful and amazing things that you do, Laila, for our community, and it's an honor for me to introduce you and to our social justice conference.
Thank you for having me. I want to start off with everyone who's in the audience to make sure your chat box is up, because I want to do a small exercise with you guys and just feel out where we are as a group, where we're coming from, and some personal experiences. Today's not the greatest day, but I want you to close your eyes and imagine today is one of those beautiful days outside, a San Diego clear sky day. And you're with whoever you find pleasant, whether it's your parents, your friends, your significant other, your partner, whoever it is, and you're heading towards the beach. And you're driving towards the beach, and you're gonna barbecue, you're gonna lay in the sun, you're gonna swim. It's gonna be one of those days, and you're excited. And then you see sirens behind you. And based on your knowledge, that means to pull over. What is the first emotion that comes to you? I want you to write that in the chat. The first emotion that you have when you see those sirens. Anxious, Teresa, thank you. What else do we have? Concern, anxious, fear, fear, nervous, nervous, sick to my stomach. Keep them coming. There's a lot of you guys in here. What did I do? Claire said, what did I do now? Worry. Thank you, Raquel. Nervous. Keep them coming, y'all. Let me give you guys like 10 more seconds. Confused. Shit. That was the professor who said that too. Did I do something? Panic. Right. Anxious. Normally when we have a police stop, it's not a great feeling, regardless of which social class that you're in. To some people, it's angry. How dare you pull me over? To some people, it's anxious, wondering what's going to happen as far as that ticket they're going to get and how much it's going to cost. And some people, it's fear, wondering if they're even going to make it out of that traffic stop alive. And I found as I moved class-wise in different levels in my life, that feeling differed. But one of the feelings that I never got was a feeling that the police were there to help me. And some people do have that feeling when it comes to everyday interactions with the police. So I looked at my personal life before I started really doing a lot of research and different things of that nature. And I saw there were two areas of concern. And at one point I was at both of the bottom. When I say the bottom, I don't mean that Blackness is at the bottom. I mean anti-Blackness in this country. It's built on that in the caste system of this country. And being Black and being poor it's almost suicidal. And it's not suicidal, it's almost homicidal, because the chances of you making it out and the chances of everything that is put in place in order to protect the property and the income and the assets of those with are to criminalize those without. And the police are our first stance, our first juncture in that, in maintaining that rich people, and in this country, mostly white people, maintain the inequities of property and class. And so, and also we're built off of a slave system. And we're gonna talk a little bit about that from the historical ramifications and how Blackness played into that. And regardless of your social caste, meaning do you have money economics or not, the anti-Blackness in this country still stands there. And that's why you see a lot of the rich football players and actors get pulled over by the police and they think they have a stolen car. The attorneys, we all tend to have that same kind of story. And that's because we have two different areas of concern in this country in capitalism. And that's the slaves they built this country from and keeping them in their place. And that's the poor people that they exploit every day and keeping them in their place. So we look at that at a time when I was to be stopped by the police a lot in my 20s. And a lot of it had to do with my inability to pay for what they needed me to pay for. When I went to City College, I couldn't pay for that pass. So I'd park different places and get tickets and they pile on. And the next thing you know, your car is in the impound. There were other issues that I would have driving down the street. I never had a warning when I was driving. I wasn't a rude kid to the police. I wasn't like, what do you want? And I was like, yes, sir, I wanted to get out of it when I was young. But I never got like a warning, like, hey, you didn't turn here. You didn't come to a complete stop at the stop sign, different things like that. They always turn into these monetary tickets, almost like we're here to exploit you. I didn't even know you got warnings until later in life, and people got warnings. I was like, why don't I get warnings? And I remember it led to me having my license suspended. And you still have to go back and forth, and you still have to drive, and you still have to go to work, or you have to get on a bus, or different things of that nature. And a bus pass in itself was expensive. And so I remember you take those chances and getting stopped by the police. And I see people do it every day, young people. And I remember when the police would get behind me. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I think at one point in my life, I put some tags on my car that said a year that wasn't mine. I got tags from someone else and put them on the back of the car. And I remember an elder saying, don't you want to just drive down the street and take a deep breath when the police go by you and not fear for your life because you have fake tags on your car? And it's so ironic because literally like a week later, he gets pulled over by the police. And I said, see, it doesn't work that way. And he goes, it doesn't, but you have to be as clean as you can in these interactions. And I understood what he was saying, but just that fear, when they get behind you, are they going to take my car? Are they going to take me to jail? What is going to happen? And then having other people in your car coming from a community, even when you're clean, that was my next step in life. Now I got my license, I got my registration, my tags are good, everything's great. I don't speed, I don't do things of that nature. But then if I had somebody in the car with me, all of a sudden they're like, is he on probation or parole? Is she on probation or parole? And they want to search my car. And in my community, the chances of me having a friend who hasn't been had an intersection with the law is pretty slim. I would have to go outside of my community in order to find friends because we are policed so much. And because there are no examples or warnings given, it's go straight to jail for us and don't collect those $200. So I started looking at historically, where did the police come from? Why is there such heavy policing in certain communities and not heavy policing in other communities? And why did this happen? And it starts with the actual manufacturing, the introduction of this country and how this country was founded and how it existed. And I'm not going to get into it. I know you guys know that this was a colony of England, and we're going to start off around right before America became the US, as we call it. And the reason why we're going to do that is because during that time, you had some interesting things going on. You had the industrial age going on. You had the exportation of cotton coming from the South, and cotton was king, which was taking the colonies and the wealth of the people in those colonies to next levels. And you have the people that were exploited, which were Black people, Africans who were slaves. And at that time, interesting enough, you have in the 1700s people who are immigrating to this country, and this country's never been that great. I mean, in its early inception, it seemed to be welcoming, but differences are differences, and human beings tend to have issues with people who are different. And so you had the different immigrants coming, and you had rich people now, or people with money and the protection of property. So in the North, you had in the 1700s the watchmen who came about, and these men watched poor people to ensure that people with wealth, their income was maintained. Very similar to what they had in England. In the South, there were some different things going on. You had slavery, but you had Florida, which was not part of the United States at that time. The United States was fighting for Florida. And you had Andrew Jackson, who is one of the most racist. If you have a city, anything named after this man, it is just basically a direct assault on Black people. He believed in slavery, but not only that, he actively fought to enslave free Black people who had escaped slavery. But you have people like my husband's family who were in South Carolina and in Georgia, and they did not, you're not going to read about this in the books, it's not told, but they refused to be slaves. And what they did was they escaped slavery and they went into Florida and they protected Florida. They had an alliance with the Seminole Native Americans, and they were called Black Seminoles. And they actively fought the United States government for 3 wars in order to maintain their freedom. They would send those, so South Carolina, being right there next to Florida, started the slave patrols to prevent Blacks who heard about Florida, who would then run south to Florida too. So it wasn't just Blacks going north. You had many Blacks who were going south into Florida for that freedom. And those slave patrols at that time were now paid by the government, because before they were private entities that were slave patrols. They were farmers who got together, who hired people to maintain their property, their slaves. So now you have a socialist kind of state and counties kind of entities of these patrols that are similar to our modern police departments, who are there to ensure that Africans and chattel or property did not leave these white people who depended on our free labor. And so when you look at that, and it builds up, and there were continuous wars, and the Seminoles, Black Seminoles, and the natives were then of course taken on the Trail of Tears with the other Native Americans from those 5 tribes, the Creeks, the Cherokees, the Seminoles, and the other 2 to Oklahoma, where they were then put on a reservation. And you had heavy police in there. To this day, one of the sayings that you hear a lot are, and they just, people just wander off the reservation. That's a saying that's very you'll hear it at some point that, and it's a lot of educated people say it, which is really interesting because it's basically about the Native Americans being put on these reservations and policed on these reservations to not pass these boundaries. These are people who fought actively for their land. These aren't people just laid down, blacks or natives. They went to war. And for some reason, all the movies that we have on slave movies, that's not one of them. And that's so interesting to me why it's not. But you have these different policing entities, these sheriffs that are coming into command and different things in order to maintain that. At the same time, you have your first jail systems a little later, but in California, in the West, Los Angeles specifically, which has the biggest jail system in the world. You have a jail system being built off of fighting the Native Americans and taking them from their land. You have these missionaries, these missions coming in much earlier, and from the Spanish to the French coming in and attempting to, mostly the Spanish in the West, attempting to take the natives off of their land and criminalizing them in order to do so. So you have your first jail systems being built simultaneously in other places. And none of this was about the safety of those people. Well, the safety of them not getting their heads cut off because they were exploiting people. It really was about the theft, the destruction, and the buying and selling of people. And if you look at a lot of the different times when the Native Americans, when things would kind of warm up and the Native Americans would go after the missionaries, 9 times out of 10 was because the soldiers had raped their women. And a lot of people don't even look at the depths of those situations and how a lot of those fights would start. Even when we look at the Kumeyaay and some of the issues that they had with that mission there, the soldiers kept raping Kumeyaay women. And so then the warriors would come in. And so we have issues on the exploitation, the rape, the theft, and the buying and selling of people. And then we have this entity, now what we call the modern police, who are there to maintain the benefit of the people that are doing that. Or they're actually doing it themselves. Because the soldiers at those times are going to kind of morph into your police officers, and that's what your rank and file and your different things of that nature. So now we're looking at our modern police state, and we're looking at the Emancipation Proclamation. We're also looking at many blacks who had followed that North Star, who are now in America annexed Florida and made it a slave state. That's where the Trail of Tears came from. So a lot of those escaped slaves ended up being in Oklahoma. You'll see them in Oklahoma now. But then you have those northern states where others had walked north, and you have the police there who are making sure that black people didn't move into certain areas. Um, and they did the same thing with the Irish, and the Irish ended up taking over entire police departments. And so you had different people who were immigrants that were white who were able to then do that. Africans and African descendants have never had that ability to have a trade within this country, and that would be something that we would then own. Our blackness in itself kept us out of those things. And if you look at the East Coast and you look at the Italians, you look at the Irish, and a lot of the hate that came before, a lot of the gangs that came before and different things, and how they were able to then assimilate into society where they could actually have an industry, and then of course assimilate into society as white later, and not just Irish and Italian and different things. But black people were black people. And so when we looked at those things, the police were there to abuse us, to keep us in certain areas. In the north, down south, it was terror. The sheriff and the Ku Klux Klan were the same people. And now you have modern day police forces where white supremacy is very intertwined within them. And it's a historical white supremacy. It's not new. Um, During lynchings, if you were accused of something, it would be the sheriff, the Ku Klux Klan, which would be the sheriff's brother, or the sheriff didn't put his hood on that day, would come get you, drag you out your house, castrate you, hang you, and they'd have a picnic watching you die. And that's what happened to black people. We were considered animals to this country, and come from families that we did not accept that. So my family was similar. My great great grandfather was not a slave. Bought himself out of slavery, and he had to then take his entire family up north in order so that they could have a fighting chance. And from the warrior side, I told you my husband's family, they just fought their way out of it and fought the government with with the Seminoles. So you have different fights going on as black people are saying we are not 3/5 of a human. We are human beings. We are not chattel. We are not goods. We are not products. And you are not going to utilize a police force in order to maintain our inequities in the society. And that's the point of your force. It's not to protect me. It's not to make me feel safe. It's to keep me in my place, which is lower than the people that say they created this country yet didn't build it. And so that's a fight that we've had from the civil rights movement on up into where we are now. And we look at the civil rights movement and we look at the policing. The Black Panther Party started as an organization that policed the police. And they did so with armed, they policed the police. You also have the Community Alert Patrol and in Los Angeles, who actually trained the Black Panthers on monitoring the police. And they had cars out there, they had signs out there in the 60s and 70s that would watch the police. And you had these different things go on during the civil rights movement because the police structure within itself has always been the dog of white supremacy, has always been the front line of white supremacy. And we've always acknowledged that front line of white supremacy. And in the first place you will go if you don't adhere is to jail or prison. And so initially when we were freed, that loop in the 13th Amendment was to have convict leasing, just sell Black people to corporations and have us doing the same thing we did before, just corporatize. So now we got corporate plantations. Parchment Farm in Mississippi was one of them. Angola, which is still open in Louisiana, was one of them. But then when the white worker was losing money because of the mining, having Africans, former slaves in the mines, that's when that pushback came. So convict leasing never took off like it was supposed to, not because people cared about us, but because the worker, the poor white worker fought because we were taking their jobs. So as we go through Jim Crow, who do you think maintained Jim Crow? When we went into a restaurant and it said whites only, who do you think maintained that? When the schools were unequal, who maintained that? When we fought on the bus to sit in the front, not sit in the back, who maintained that? Who are those direct people in front of us at every juncture who are making sure that we are second, third class citizens? And that's law enforcement. Where are we going if we don't listen to these things that tell us we're less than a human? We're going to jail. I say to people all the time, every single hero that I have is a felon. And it says a lot when you have multiple pictures of Dr. Martin Luther King being arrested. And then we start to look at, because people say, hey, I really support law enforcement. What do you support about law enforcement? Because they are the ones, if a law is racist, they're still going to follow that law. They're not there to think. They're not there to promote equality. So as long as we have, and then they have their own racism built in there and white supremacy that's built into their ranks. What do you support about law enforcement? What we should do is support equitable policy and rooting out anyone who has a supremacist, an unequal point of view or of any kind, period. But we don't look at it like that. And so when we support law enforcement, we support white supremacy because there's still laws like gang laws that are white supremacist at nature, and they are here to maintain inequities. And that's part of the fight. So at Pillars, unfortunately, we're not good niggas. And I don't know how I'm gonna die because of that. I don't know what's gonna happen because of that, but we're not. And so one of the things that we say is, and that we do is monitor law enforcement and hold them accountable for the damage that they've done in our community. And now we're getting to the modern policing. I grew up in the 1980s. In the 1980s, we saw crack cocaine come in. I'm a 70s baby, but I was 5 during the 70s. So that's not like a big memory of me, for me. But in the 80s is when those memories first came, when rap music came, when this thing called crack cocaine came, and I didn't understand, where did it come from? We don't have plantations. Who grows this stuff? How does it get here? But yet we're the ones severely criminalized for the sale. When guns, I have never seen a Black gun manufacturing shop, but all of a sudden these guns are in my community and they're assault weapons and they're everywhere. And what I thought they were, let's back up a little bit. A lot of the fear, when we look back on it, wasn't even there. A lot of the homicides and everybody's dying and it's a slaughter and you can't even walk outside without bullets flying and your uncle's gonna kill you for crack. All of these things ended up being really flamed by the media and they weren't even true. We did have violence issues, but not to the level that we were being told as we locked our doors and everyone was afraid. And growing up in that, and policy that came out easily by both Democrats and Republicans to give people enhancements and to give people extra time. So then you had people say, well, if you do this, it's 6 years. But if you do it with this, we're going to give you 20 years. And we saw inequities and didn't even understand when it was happening. Like, what does that mean? And I'm going to get into more of the real of some of the serious ones and how they harmed us later. But all of a sudden, we had so many people in prison that we had someone committing suicide once a day due to lack of medical care. There were so many people in prison that some of our communities had been destroyed, like during the slave trade, when so many Blacks were snatched out of villages. And the criminalized people always have been Black people in this country. At one time, we were the top population in prisons. Our ratio has never been justified how we would be the number one demographic in prisons. Right now, we're number two behind Hispanic, who is not, their ratio is not over in prison, but it's equal. But we Black people have always made up the opening area for whites. We made up their numbers and ours for some reason, racial-wise, in prisons. When we look at that, it's really sad because the impact from voting to the Black family to poverty, the only thing that they can say that scientifically follows violence is poverty. And having households with one person by itself has decimated our community and has kept leading on to violence and the perpetuation of violence, and of course the prison industrial slave complex. And so judges said that we had to empty out our prisons. And if we didn't empty them out in California, I currently just said we, like I am California. If California didn't empty out those prisons, then the feds were coming in. Not because they cared about the people that were in there, but because it had at this point reached Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment. And they needed to make sure that there was constitutional rights at certain levels. And it wasn't just Black people that were dying like that in those prisons. And so laws started to change there. And policy started to change, or the opening of policy started to change. Simultaneously, those of us who grew up in the era of when the STEP Act was created in 1988, which is the Street Terrorism Act, basically saying that Black and Mexican kids are terrorists. It's a gang act. It defined what a gang was, and it defined how you punish a person if caught doing a felonious act and they were documented in a gang. And our community didn't pay much attention to that. We didn't realize that a gang is three or more people. And in that area of three or more people that might share the same color and handshake, um, someone's caught 3 times selling drugs, you can now make them a gang. Nobody questioned that, because if they did, everybody in the county of San Diego would be a gang. Because in La Jolla, there's 3 kids who hang out, and in La Jolla, there's more than 3 times in that area that somebody's gotten caught selling drugs. So that could be a gang. They have graffiti. They have a group name. That could be a gang. In Lakeside, same thing. In Santee, same thing. In Coronado, same thing. Coronado even got so great with it, they decided they were going to be Crips at one time. And you know what they did? They came in there and they gave them services. They came in there and the police told the parents, you're going to have the Black people come over here and start shooting because those are the animals. We have to, our kids are trying to follow this. We really need to support our kids. The criminal justice system was not a juncture for their kids when they decided to be Crips after they saw the movie Colors and they liked it. And so we started looking at the criminalization of our young people. In my generation, so many of the young Black and Mexican kids went to YA, California Youth Authority, which is now closing down. A lot of people aren't saying the truth on how and why, but YA was gladiator school. It was also a place where you got raped. It was a place where you got raped by staff. You got raped by older boys. It was a place where you were abused daily. So they sent our kids to these places where they were harmed. And the police were the ones who were picking them up. The police were the ones who were charging them. The police were the ones who were documenting them. And so looking at the holistic piece of mass incarceration, the first point of entry was law enforcement. and the police in our communities. And so therefore, as we change policy, as we shut down California youth authorities, as we prevent them from being able to send our kids to adult prisons and try them as an adult, which they also did as of 2000, the DA would directly file and send our kids to prison. We had to start also in being inclusive of police accountability. How does police accountability work? First of all, we look at some of the issues. We look at data, we look at research, but we also listen to stories. And some of those are the best ones, bigger than any data and research, because a person, a community will let you know in a story what's happening over and over. And let me give you one of the things that we're seeing when we look at the stories, and we're out there looking at the police stops that the data wouldn't even reveal because we pulled public records requests on them, and the data would never tell us this. But the police utilize tactics and the lack of people knowing their rights to then destroy their constitutional rights. And they do it very tricky. And that's why you'll see in the statistics, it'll say, although Black people are found with contraband less, they're searched more by the police. But what they do on the ground is to trigger that search. And so what they'll do is they'll have a person who's driving, and that's the only person they should be having any kind of interaction with, unless they have probable or reasonable doubt, probable cause to think that something else is going on. It's not, it's a routine traffic stop. And they'll ask the driver if they're on probation or parole. Driver says no. They get their registration. But at the same time, what they'll do is have another officer start questioning the passengers in the car. And the passengers in the car talk to the police. And if that person's on probation, if you have 4 Black men or 4 Mexican men in the car, somebody's on probation, because that's a domino effect in our community, is the incarceration and the surveillance of Black and brown people. And so that not happening would be, wow. But all they need is one, and then they're going to search that entire car. And they're going to do this over and over throughout these young people's lives. And they're going to find stuff in certain cars, but the voices we don't hear are the voices, the majority. And that's the people that they don't find anything in their cars. The police right now said they just found 11 guns in cars, but you searched, you violated 80 people to find 11 guns. And we're looking at the world and we're saying, first of all, if you have a problem with anything, what does the solution look like? What does it look like to not have the police in our area? Are the police truly protecting us? When some violence happens and they swarm into the community and they racially profile every Black and brown youth, does that ultimately assist us in keeping us alive? Is that the way that we want to go? Or do the police stop crime? If you ask any police officer, if you look it up, the police aren't here to stop crime. The police investigate crime. They solve crime. That's why when something happens, people call the police. The police come, they take a report. At that point, your report is assigned to someone who then investigates what you've said. And so if we know that, do we want to put our money? Do we want to put our goals? Do we want to put our budget, our city and county budgets, or anything else into policing? Or let's change that. Do we want to put it into investigating crime? Or do we want to put it into stopping violence and crime? I've always said that I want to prevent rape. I think that that can be done in our lifetime because of the toxicity of rape, the patriarchal function of rape, and what we've seen, why people do what they do. That's something that we can stop. The police won't stop that. That's going to be some hardcore transformative work that we do within our community in community building. And it's going to take communities coming together to ensure their safety. I have twins, they're young Black boys, they're 12 years old. Realistically, I know the police aren't going to keep my kids alive. So why would I pour everything into them investigating the would-be murderer of my 12-year-olds? That sounds kind of ass backwards, doesn't it? Why wouldn't I be putting that into keeping my 12-year-olds alive? But that's just what we do every day when we say that the police should be the law and order frontline solution to our everyday problems. And it ends up being the criminalization of our entire community. Our community has been robbed of so many resources, and we justify it by using the same tropes, the same stereotypes as others use against us, instead of looking and how can we come together as people and first hold them accountable. We have police officers who go to court and they lie, and they get paid well overtime to go to court and lie. That's one of their big expenditures, is going to court, and they lie. They not only lie on the hours they spent in court to get the overtime, but they get on the stand and they lie. And the reason I know that is because I've been there. I see it, and I've seen the police have lied on me before, and in situations where no one was criminal, it was a complaint, and that's when I realized the police lie, and they lie all the time, and that's a scary situation. That's why body cams have been so important. But looking at how many people are affected by those lies, we have people that are in prison right now because of those lies, and there's no oversight in stopping them from doing that. And a lot of people say we should reform the police. How? How? If we know why the police were how law enforcement got to be what it is, and we know why it's here to protect the property and the safety of people that don't look like us and make a lot more money than we do, what are we trying to reform? Do we need to reimagine public safety? Is that what we're saying? We say we need to reform the police, but why are we stuck on the police or public safety? Um, if we ask our grandmothers, those of us from the Black and brown communities who've been heavily policed, and we ask our great aunts and great uncles, what did they do in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s when they had public safety issues? Calling the police was not one of them, because everyone's safety, particularly if you were Black folks living down south, that's what you didn't do, was call the police. And so what did we do to keep our community safe? And what failed because we didn't have something that we probably needed during those times that we need to make sure it's there as we build up our communities. So we'll go out on Wednesday or Thursday, and we really try to chase the gang detail. And the reason why is the gang unit, they get about 16 million when you look at the different pots of money in and out, clean about 8, 9 million goes directly to them. And their job is to stop Black and brown boys and to interview them and put them on list. That's it. And so their job is to violate the constitutional rights of our people and to document young people and put them on gang rosters. And this a lot of times starts when kids are 12 years old, um, before they've even chosen to be in a gang, when they live in our community. And so right there, what's going on is police are pushing parents out, and they're criminalizing their kids. And the police wouldn't even tell you they stopped your kid. The law has changed, but they would have to tell you that they put your kid on the cow gangs list, but that doesn't mean you told me that you stopped my kid. It says that when you're ready to document my kid, you have to tell me. And so we're looking at the different tricks that they utilize with our children. And then after that, and gang documentation, that could be done anywhere. If they put the gang unit in La Jolla right now, they could have as many kids on that list as they do in our community, but they don't. The same with Lakeside, Santee, El Cajon, but they don't. They're in our community. They're in Oceanside. They're in Vista. They're in communities that are either heavily Black or heavily Hispanic, or both. And that's because we are the bait. We're the people that they're going for. We are the ones that they don't want around or they have to keep in check for some reason. We're the fear of an adult Black or brown man or woman for some reason, revolutionary, coming up and ensuring that a lot of the things that were done, the injustices are corrected. A lot of times another kind of built-in reason on the heavy policing to make sure that there's no George Jackson that comes about, or Huey Newton or Malcolm X, imprison them young and ensure that we keep things just like they are. And we're seeing a lot of that come out too. But they document our kids, and then when these young men become adults, and because of poverty, because of trauma, because of mental health, the other anything that happens, if they commit an offense, they then do more time than their white counterpart who is similarly situated. The crime is the exact same, but the black or brown man does more time because of gang documentation. And we're seeing that. And I just want to let you guys know about prison. And people laugh about it, but people will say, don't drop the soap. And we're in a culture that's laughing at rape. Um, and there are a lot of different jail sayings. When you think about them, we're in a culture that's laughing at trauma, that's laughing at abuse. So anytime a district attorney sends anyone to prison, they know where they're putting them. And let's look at the people that are going to prison. A kid who writes on a wall, that's a misdemeanor. That's not a felony. Any kid who writes on a wall, any adult who writes on a wall, that's a misdemeanor, unless you put a gang enhancement on it. So if you document this person and they write F you on the wall, and the white kid writes F you on the wall, the Mexican kid goes to prison for a misdemeanor. You're not supposed to go to prison for a misdemeanor. You're supposed to do jail time at most, probation, you're supposed to get help, all of those things. This kid goes to prison. So because this kid and this other kid gets all the help that they need, same exact situation, but they use gang laws to only identify our youth being in them, and then to systemically give them harsher sentences than anyone else, and then say they're not racist. And we have an issue with that. We have an issue when a young person goes and they had a kid in City Heights like this, young girl, beer run. She goes in with a group of friends, same group of kids she always hangs out with, but they're all documented because they hang around each other from the east side. She grabs something out the refrigerator, beer or something, does a beer run, beer. They didn't get the beer. I think the beer was all on the floor by the time that was done. Security guard tries to grab her. She flings her hand. She's not going to stop for the security guard. And I think it was about maybe $30, $40 worth of beer, which is petty theft. And they take it. No one's hurt. Maybe prides or egos because she pulled her arm from the security guard. They charged her with robbery. The reason why they charged her with robbery and not petty theft is because they said force or fear. That's the element of robbery. And they said when she did this, that was force. The difference between petty theft and robbery is probation and some classes, or a violent felony with a strike and a midterm of 4 years in prison. That's the difference. On top of that, they hit her with a gang enhancement. And they hit a gang enhancement on a violent crime is 10 years. So this little girl who should have been getting probation by law, max, they have triggered into getting 14 years in prison for a beer run where no one was hurt. And those are the kind of laws we're seeing, and that's how it's affecting our young people. And knowing something like that, 80% of people plea bargain before they get to trial. So when the DA hits you with that and says, well, you're going to go ahead and take this strike, and you're going to take this year in jail, and you're going to do this, and you're not going to be able to get a job because you're going to have a strike and a felony. You're not going to be able to live certain places. You're not going to be able to do certain things. But if you ever get in trouble again, after I take every means I can of making you employable, if you get in trouble again, we're going to give you another strike and we double up on you. And they put them in the system. And they put them in the system. And they start to feed probation because this is money. Now somebody has to monitor this person. They start to feed the surveillance people with the bands they put on your feet because this is money. And someone has to monitor these people. So when we go out and we fight these injustices, these policies, we're fighting law enforcement, the police. We're fighting them hand in hand. One of the biggest things we do with the police officers is try to get it where they go to court and we impeach them. Meaning we have so many complaints in our community about what officers have done. Those people, those 80% of the people who were not caught with contraband complain. When that officer gets to court and they're going to lie and say that was a legal search they did with that kid they did catch, we can get that evidence suppressed if we begin to document what they're doing in our community. We begin to take away they're looking what the judge will say, well, I know it's your word against his, but he's the police, so I believe the police. That's what we get when we go there. Unless we have 10, 20 other people who have complained and said he did this or she did this at this time, that assists us. And in this criminal justice system from being able to do that. If we're looking at gang documentation and we can have the research to say it is racist, it's a Jim Crow law, not, well, are they in a gang? That is not the point. If we have violence in our community, we need to confront that violence. But gang laws are not based on violence. They're racist. They're based on race. They're based on giving certain people more time than other people. And if we can confront that together, we have a gang bill out right now, AB 333, where we're confronting the way that they deal with young people by saying, when they go into court, making a whole gang case. This is a gang case. And I wish some of you guys would come court watch with us. Right now, we have an issue with the district attorney and her informants. She has a Crip informant who our district attorney allows to rape, harm, abuse, molest, and kidnap young Black and Latino women. And he's on her payroll. Not only that, he starts continuous violence with other Black men, where there have been 3 shootings and people dead from something he started. And he's on her payroll. And going to court watch and seeing some of these systemic injustices is holding a politician who's voted on to the fire. Because Summer Stefan tells everyone that she's the Olivia from the sex unit, that show with the police officers and the sex crime. She's her. She helps with human trafficking. She saves the girls. But yet you have a person you paid $30,000 a week after he beat a Black woman with a crowbar. And so those things right there are opposed on who you say you are. So when we have people go court watch, they can really see the systemic injustices that are going on in those court cases and how we confront that. Our whole goal is when we can fix some of these laws, we fix these laws. But we need to overturn the way we look at safety, the way we look at policing, the way we look at punishment, the way we look at justice collectively, and evolve as a human race on how we're going to maintain safety in our communities. And the first way of doing that is to understand that at the root of the problem lies capitalism. Within all forms of capitalism lies poverty. And then those on top get to pick who should be the ones in poverty. And where are we going to go as a people to maintain the safety and the support against a system that's here to feed off of our blood? We're no longer slaves. We no longer pick the cotton. But now there are CEOs who can make 6 figures and cops who can make 6 figures as long as they can criminalize you. And so that's our goal at Pillars, from the police to the courts to the laws, that we make sure that those injustices go away. And we do that with an assortment of people. It's not just us. We couldn't get that done if it was just us. And so it's important. I want to give you guys something before you leave, but before you do that, are there any questions?
I just want to add, feel free to put your questions in the chat directly to Laila, or you can at this time use the raise hand feature, because you're ready for Q&A, right, Laila? Okay, yeah, let's engage. You can use the raise hand feature, and we allow you all to unmute yourself to ask your question.
I have one from a YL. What seeds do you think might be helpful to start planting here in San Diego in terms of a reparations movement to hold the city, counties, etc., accountable to our Black community? And I'm thinking about Evanston III, who just committed to 10 million over the next 10 years to distribute to the Black community there, but with some weird requirements of proving residency between certain dates. Okay, so you have, and then let me know if I don't go far enough, the redistribution of those resources. I am, and always been, I'm a Pan-Africanist at heart. So I've always been a fan of reparations. The reparations movement has taken some dramatically scary turns lately with the ADOS, that's ascendance, ADOS, something, you have to be Black and you were a former slave to get it. And I fall under that. But as a Pan-Africanist, I see myself very entwined with other African people. And that's going to be Caribbeans and Africans and anybody throughout the diaspora. So when the reparations movement became very kind of like almost white structured and very like isolationist, I couldn't gig with that. But as far as the United States government owing reparations to Black people and Europe owing reparations to indigenous people throughout the world, I am a fan of both. Okay, we got Angelica. I feel like the new Supreme Court argument in Ganglia versus Storm gives police more power to be able to enter a home without a warrant and get away with things like Breonna Taylor. And Angelica, the Supreme Court said slavery was legal. The Supreme Court said separation, Black people being separated and having Jim Crow was legal. The Supreme Court is not, in my opinion, an authoritative of humanity, but a representation of the people that put those people in their positions. And so when you have white supremacy and you have white supremacists put people on a bench, you're going to get white supremacist rulings. And that's why a lot of people say, well, follow the law. What law? The law said I'm a slave. The law has said I'm separate but equal. I'm with Martin Luther King on that. I don't follow unjust, immoral laws. And I don't pretend to. I don't care what Supreme Court says that you should. So I don't feel anything's good coming out of the Supreme Court at all. Even RBG, everybody loves her. She was horrible on criminal justice, but she was good on certain things like feminism and womanism and employment. And I give her mad props for that, but she wasn't good on certain white supremacist notions and slavery and the criminal justice system and how those things tie into each other. Claire, I would love for you to court watch. I'm gonna give you our information, okay? Who was the woman who had that man on her payroll? Summer Stefan, Aida, she's our district attorney. The guy's name is Stefan, he's a Crip, and he's one of many. And so that she pays them because she wants them to go into their community and either start crime or look at crime and then get people that they can arrest. And he's actually an interesting one because a lot of the informants are police informants. This guy, he's not a kid. He's a DA informant. So he works directly for the DA. That's his handler. Earl McNeil was another person who got killed in National City. He was an informant. And he worked directly. That's why he went to the police in National City and banged on there when he was having a mental health crisis, because that's who he worked for. He worked for the police. That's who he worked for help. But another issue we're having though is a lot of the informants that the police and district attorney are using are people who are not on medication and they're schizophrenic and have other serious mental health issues that have hallucinations and they're not on medication. So, but yet they still go to court and they testify and people go to prison for the rest of their lives. And you don't even know if they really saw what they saw. So that's another issue. And plus they're getting paid and they don't want to go to jail. And that's what started this whole thing on the district attorney or the police approaching them and saying, this is your free get out of jail card. Any more questions? Ask hard questions. Oh, Professor.
I did that to you, Laila. I know, but you always handle the hard questions. That's why I'm like, ask hard questions.
And now so Angelica says, yes, and now they are saying the police can enter the home without a warrant under guise of safety. Yes, they're not supposed to go into anything and look without, it's called plain sight, right? So if you have a drawer open, they can see plain sight. So they're allowed to go in and sweep the room, the house even. And parole and probation have been doing this to us forever. Those of us who have loved ones who had parole or probation at our house, they come in, they sweep the whole house to make sure for safety, but they're not supposed to be able to go in anything regardless unless they have a warrant. But we're seeing that they'll go in, they'll sweep a house in San Diego, then they'll have the family outside the house for 8 hours while they try to get a warrant. Then they go into the house and they start searching things that are not on the warrant. So you guys make sure that you're looking at all of these different things and you're complaining. Or if you have a friend it's happened to, where did they search? Look at the warrant. Where does it say they can search on the warrant? Are they staying in those designated areas? And make sure that they do those things, because all of those are complaints. And sometimes those are things that can be suppressed in court if we do it the right way. Never consent to be searched, and never try to talk your way out of going to jail. It does not work. It will never work. The best thing for you to do is shut up. Never, if you want to go and they start asking you questions, am I being detained or am I free to go? If they tell you you're free to go, walk away. If they tell you you're being detained, say, I would like my attorney. I have nothing else to say. You will not talk your way out of going to jail. It's not going to happen. Trust me on that one. So now they're saying, okay, we got that one, Angelica. Yes, they're using our disabled community. Some of the stories that we look at, some of the informants they're using it's just heartbreaking on who they're doing it to. I know Earl McNeil, his mom was murdered when he was like 8 years old, and he started having problems, and they put him in like juvenile hall at 10. Who puts a kid in juvenile hall? San Diego did this. And so he never had a chance and never had a shot. And then, he ends up with mental health issues. The police end up exploiting him, and it's really bad. What are your conditions and thoughts on the conditions of jails in San Diego? Well, one of the things are they become mental health institutions because we're still practicing barbarism when we look at people who are in need and people who are different. And instead of really looking at how to treat our most vulnerable, some of our most vulnerable people are disabled populations, and getting those evidence-based treatments and really working and funding these things, because that's what it all comes to, where you want to put your money. They say, no, we don't want to do that. We want to give the jails all the money and the police. And so therefore, those people end up in jail. There's nowhere else for them to go. That's where we've invested. We've invested in the jails to take care of that. And that's one of the reasons why we have one of the highest suicide rates in the country in our local jails, is because we're ill-equipped on handling that. But what do you do when you invest in that? Until San Diego decides that an investment is healing people, an investment is evidence-based best practices, an investment is treating people human, then we'll continue to have the same issues we're having in jails.
I think we have a question from Timothy.
All right, Timothy.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the way, at least I only have experience in California, but at least in California, all the jails are organized along racial lines. There's different cars, there's the white car, there's the black car, there's all these. And it always seemed to me to be keep people separate and easier to control in jail. But is there also a kind of a solidarity thing there? It just always struck me as very weird that it's very, you have a shot caller for the woods, the white people, and then a shot caller for the blacks, and usually two different Hispanic ones, for native and non-native. Do you think that's a bad thing, the way they're doing that, or is that a good thing? A complicated thing.
I'm not going to say good or bad. I'm not going to say good or bad. But at one point, it was black and white in prisons in California. And that was the majority. It was black and white people. And it's been, and that was one place where blacks outnumbered whites, besides in the South. And there were a lot of issues, racial lines. And most of the whites that were there were very poor whites who had very strong sentiments, because a lot of times the only thing you have when you're a poor white is the fact that you can say you're white. And so a lot of the supremacy and the hatred comes out of that, being poor in class in a country that you can be degraded the same, but saying, well, at least I'm not black. But then you had the Hispanics starting to move into the prisons. And throughout the 70s and the 80s in the civil rights movements, what they did was they went and took all of those shot callers and they put them in solitary housing. So they would identify using similar stuff like gang documentation. They would in the prison identify who's the Nazi lowrider king or shot caller, who's the Wood shot caller, who's the Norteño shot caller, who's the Mexican LMA who runs the Mexican mafia, who runs the Southsiders shot caller. And it shows you, as interesting that is, out of all of those, the blacks are our prison gang that got us in the shoe was the Black Guerrilla Family, which is a political organization So it was really interesting. It just showed that they were like, we just don't need black people being politicized, period. So they went and grabbed them. They were followers of George Jackson and put them in solitary housing confinement. And some of them were in there for 40 years, 30 years. And they were back there, and you had all the people that hated each other. During the 90s and 2000s, you go up to the prison, and the prison would be on lockdown for 6 months because of race riots. I mean, that's just what it was. And then and it was just like that. You can't use the same phone, you can't eat the same food, you can't do a lot of these things because of that. And a lot of people think it was a racial thing, but a lot of it started and stemmed out of protection. Because then you had at the same time these youngsters starting to come through prison, and a lot of times at prison, rape and different things that was and pimping out weak people from their cell and beating them. Those were things that they did in prison. So you had these young boys, these Bloods and Crips in different places, and these youngsters come in, and they're like, no, 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 no. So they stopped a lot of it went too far though, because they actually outlawed homosexuality on main lines where you could be killed. So that's a hate crime. You're killing somebody because they're homosexual. It started because of the rape that was going on. And so they kicked them down to sensitive needs yards. And nothing's perfect. We got to keep working because we can't be homophobic. And it's not okay to kill somebody because they're gay and they're on a main line in prison. That's never okay. But that's what they began to do. But another thing in the solitary housing unit, about 5 years ago, the shot callers, the whites, the blacks, the Mexicans, the natives from these prison gangs got together and said, check this out. We're not going to get out here. I've been in here for 19 years. I've been in here for 40 years. All I do is sit in a cell. They're not going to let us out here. We need to do something. And they did something called the Agreement to End Hostilities, which a good friend of mine wrote. And it basically took the racial strife out of the prison politics. And for the first time ever, California prisons are not being rocked with racism and violence. And then these shot callers then did a hunger strike where they put every California prisoner on a main line on a hunger strike. And they all went, and everybody stopped eating. Everybody started refusing their trays. Some of us on the outside stopped eating. And it went national. And it's actually in the organizing volume of the new Jim Crow organizing manual, that prison push, that prison organizing. And so now when we go into prisons, the kids have an ability to live. You're not gonna have a kid coming from LA, Mexican kid, his people send them off. You gotta go kill the blacks, man. That's what the call is. Next thing you know, you got a huge riot, people stabbing each other. That's gone. And they're actually starting to talk and get to know each other. But then when that happens and the police see that, they go, oh, shoot. So what they do is they go get all the guys who told on them and the rapists and the child molesters, and they say, we're going to integrate your yards. So now what they're doing in California is integrating the sensitive needs yards with the main line, and that's causing all the violence again. And so that's the next issue we have, because it can't be peaceful. CDCR wouldn't get their money. Did that help you, Timothy? Was that Timothy? Did that help?
Yes, thank you. And I'm glad to hear that at least for a little while it was getting better. I spent some time in the 90s and it was very bad.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had two questions for you, Laila, if that's okay.
Yes.
One was, I don't know, do we know any numbers on how many people were given a death penalty from COVID for, they might have gone to prison for, a minor crime, and then they're dead because of the prisons not protecting them from the coronavirus, or in jails or prisons?
I don't have the jail, but I was tracking the prison ones. For some reason, here, let me use my phone. But yes, I know that the way that they dealt with COVID was one of those people to die. I think 40% of the inmate population at CDCR got COVID. And they would send 6 COs into every single dorm or every single building. It was really sad. So, and they're finally getting a hold on it, but not because they are doing anything good, it's because everybody got it already. So statewide, as of 3/12, 216 people died. But this isn't the people that are still dealing with the after effects, the breathing problems now because of COVID. Thousands upon thousands of people. I want to give you the actual number of positive tests of COVID. They had a whole graph that looks like they took away recently. Oh, no, they didn't. Even from their staff. I mean, thousands of their staff members got COVID. It was just a real mismanagement and a mishandling of a pandemic. on CDCR
Thank you
side.
very much, Laila. The other question I had is, we've all heard of the school to prison pipeline,
Mhm.
and flipping it the other way around, prison to school. Um, do we have any community efforts for educating our youth in juvenile hall? I know we have a lot of amazing students who are formerly incarcerated who are at City College right now. I've had some of my most outstanding students have been formerly incarcerated, and they are just shining stars. Do we have any other programs to help youth or adults in either in jail, in different stages of either jail or prison or detention, to come into education?
In the last, in the last decade or so, California, policy-wise, and those are state laws, policy-wise has made some significant step in order to move investments into educating people behind bars, whether it's youth or adults. So before, in the 80s, you wouldn't have college like you have now at CDCR. Then it slowly moved to correspondence classes you could do. But now you literally have Senate bills and Assembly bills that have allowed people to have the Board of Governor fee waiver and financial aid, and have actual colleges come in there and start working on transferable credits, like Coastline College and Foothills and different things of that nature. So those are good things. The same goes with some of our young people. I'm not seeing it as robust as I'm seeing it in the adult prison though. For like, well, DJJ is closing, but for like our juvenile halls. One of the things that a lot of people are saying are with very risky populations. I'm going to call it risky populations. I call it populations that could probably do some great work, that we can really focus on and get and really get some great things out of. That trade, vocational trade, or post-secondary education while in high school is a best practice, so that once they've graduated from high school, they might already have a year into community college. So now they're a sophomore, right? Or once they graduate from high school, they might already have a year into an electrician's course. So now they're like a third or fourth period electrician. And that's a best practice for these young people, that because there's poverty is surrounding them, and looking at some of the reasons why different demographics don't make it through college. So those are things that we're seeing. So hopefully those are things that we'll see expounded for young people. But I'm very happy that all of these need to be more money needs to be put into these. There needs to be more education. I would love, I don't think we should have prisons, but while we're getting rid of them, people should be coming home with bachelor's degrees. That's the only thing that's going to get them out of poverty is education or a skill. And we know that to be true also through evidence.
And also more teachers of color to keep them from going to prison in the first place.
Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, that should start.
Yeah.
Teachers of color in elementary school, teachers of color, and we have to do something. I don't know, buy people a house. What do you need to do? But we need to get, and a lot of times it happens with these misdemeanors. You might have a kid who wrote on the wall. That'd have been a misdemeanor. He could have been a 5th grade teacher, but you gave him a felony. It sent him to Donovan, and now he can never be a teacher. Those are the collateral effects of what they do to our community, unfortunately. Anything else, you guys?
Thank you so much for all the great wisdom and where's any other questions for our amazing speaker, Laila?
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you. Don't be shy.
Laila, I asked a hard question. Laila's gonna be like, but what about, you're talking about, impacted folks who are impacted, right, by laws and
Yes.
the justice system. What about folks who say, who have a very, standard or traditional view of crime? They say, well, if you're a criminal, you chose that life, or we need police because they stop crime. And when people like they have this notion of good and bad people, what do you say to that, right? Because when you have that narrative, it's very hard to receive a lot of what you're saying, about crime and laws. So what do you say to folks who have that outlook?
Everybody's not going to get it. But starting here when we were young, you were the cowboy, I was the Indian. So it started there. You know, we start very young with young people on what good and evil is, and what's the bad, who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. Um, there's no argument you can give me that police stop crime. The police won't even argue that point with you. So in order for us to have a conversation, you guys, my debating skills are sometimes not the best because I like to argue with Fox people. So I'll tell them in a minute, we can't even start a conversation because your IQ is not high enough. The police don't stop crime. So let's start where at truth somewhere. The police are there to investigate crime. I'm saying let's stop crime, and you're telling me I'm wrong. You're telling me that all of our money should be going to investigating crime. Aren't you backwards? So you're saying that if anybody you loved who had been harmed, you could have stopped that from happening. You would decide not to just to get the person punished. And when people start to really think about that, but one of the things that stops them is, well, what do we do? What are the Zapatista doing? You have different indigenous folks who are doing justice without the courts, without police, who are doing transformative justice. You have small populations within our country who are doing transformative justice under critical resistance. If you guys have any time, look at critical resistance, there's a book, and I send it into the prison a lot. It's a transformative justice book that goes further than restorative justice, because it doesn't just look at the harm done, repairing the situation. It looks at why is there harm, period, anytime that there's harm. And it doesn't differentiate between the person who this person's mad at being a victim or the aggressor, right? We're here to heal the harm, but we always have to point to somebody. And that's one of the things in itself. We're pointing to somebody, but sometimes it's the environment that needs to be pointed at. Well, it is all the time. And looking further there, with still having responsibility and self-responsibility, but letting the person build up to there with capacity. If the person has nothing, has been given nothing, no shot. Sometimes I look at these kids in prison and I'm like, where were we? This kid had not one shot. And we have people on death row like that. Foster kid, given up, thrown out, molested, raped. And the first chance they intersected with the criminal justice system, we sent them to death row. No shot. What was the point of that? What was the point of that? And look at how did we allow that to happen as people? Just on your own block, make sure you know what's going on. Make sure you know everybody on your street. Make sure the old people know you. Make sure the young people know you. That's one of the biggest ways of preventing crime, is to know the people you're around.
And know who you're electing.
Know who you're electing.
Who's the district attorney who you elected in your neighborhood? Who put that? I'm looking at a picture of Breonna Taylor right now. That there was a judge that was elected that signed that no-knock warrant where Breonna Taylor was killed. That judge was elected.
That's right.
Judges who elected them?
Officials.
Right. Who in our community are we electing and to either protect or not protect us?
Exactly. And we really need to look at that. I gave you guys my personal cell phone number. Text me, because I don't really answer calls, but text me. That's our website. If anybody wants to look at our police accountability program or our court watch program, text me and I'll put you in, get you trained up, and you can experience that. Also, what I would like you guys to do is put this in your wallet or purse where your credit cards are, where it's important. If you can't find it, you can always text me on that number. But I want you to take down our hotline. If you or anyone else has received an injustice, it doesn't have to be right then and there. You can call us afterwards. But if you feel as though you've been wronged, and I don't care if the police just didn't have his mask on, he was talking to you, and he could have given you COVID, I want you to call me. I want you to call our hotline. And that number is 619-880-7247. Write that down. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. You can also go to your phone, and this is really easy. It's copstop.app. It's a little form that's going to come up on your phone. Copstop.app. In case you don't have that phone number, if you're ever hurt, harmed, treated poorly by law enforcement, I don't care if it's the sheriff, if it's police department, I don't care who it is, you either give us a call or you fill that out. We get those in real time, okay? Copstop.app. All right, y'all. You guys are amazing. Any other questions?
Thank you, Layla. I know you'll come through. I've seen it.
Yes,
I-
ma'am. Yes,
Laila,
ma'am.
don't play. All
We have
right.
two guys. Teresa has her hand up. I don't know how to do it though. How do we do it?
She can
Hi,
unmute herself.
Okay.
thank you so much for the talk. First of all, it was very, very informative. And thank you as well for the resources that you shared with us. My question, or well, let me start with a description of or where the question's coming from. But I have some friends, and we often talk about abolishing oppressive systems that uphold white supremacy, such as ICE and the police. And these ideas are met with a lot of resistance from some of our peers and colleagues, as you might imagine. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on this?
The only reason we have borders is to maintain inequities in how we treat people and oppression. Why is there a border? And why do people want to come to this? Because what we've done is destroyed their environment. And I can say we at any point because any of us who if we're not helping destroy those, we are benefiting from them. Um, those are the different intersections that are dealt with. Are the government, the CIA, goes into these countries. We deport people when they grew up here. They came at 1 years old and they get a felony, and we taught them gangbanging and send them back to Honduras. And it's different from ensuring that our T-shirt stays to be $10, toppling governments to make sure that those workers and those things that can help us exploit them in natural resources, on top of a lot of the different things, and the government's hatred of socialism, just being busybodies in those countries and toppling those governments. Those are the issues that we have right now. So our issues aren't ICE is an issue because ICE is maintaining white supremacy so that this country does not have to acknowledge the harm that it has done globally. And borders are another attribute of those things. And if we look at the immediate infrastructure, but borders being built in this country, you look at the natives who would cross back and forth, Delfina Cuera, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And her tribe, that's what they did. They were hunters and gatherers in this area of San Diego. And they built a border while she was on the other side and told her where she was from. And that just shows you right now, that shows you right there that borders are bullshit. And until we look globally on it, it's not our job to always oppress someone. It's not our job to Americanize someone. It's not our job to harm someone. And other countries are just as bad as this country when it comes to doing that. And that needs to be a global effort, or this whole world is probably going to go boom and everybody's just going to be looking stupid and dead. So it's just where as a people keep fighting though, Teresa. Keep fighting against oppression. Keep fighting against what you believe to be true. Keep studying those things. How do you break down ICE? What are the power structures that keep ICE? Power map. Who's keeping ICE here? And look at those different entities, whether they're senators and it's the national government or whatever keeps ICE in power. Start building to topple those systems of oppression and doing that. And there are different ways to do that. There's a political way to engage politically. There's direct action ways. So just don't give up. Thank you, America. And Candace.
Well, I think if there aren't any more questions for Layla, we'll wrap. And I do believe there's another session going on at 2:20. You can check the social justice conference schedule for that if you'd like. Thank you so much, Layla. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you
Oh,
for having me.
real quick, Ebony, I'll share my screen so we can see the next sessions that are coming up. So right in here, we have our next session. We have our outstanding, also member of board member of Pillars of the Community, Michelle Woodson, on Think Dignity. That's in session A, and then we have Teddy Cruz and Fauna Foreman in session B.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll drop a link. There's a link to the schedule and do our survey. Have a good afternoon. Thank you,
All
Laila.
right. Give it up for Laila, folks. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Whoop, whoop.
Thank
Thank you so much, Laila. This is really
you.
dope. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ebony, for helping.
Oh yeah, no problem. You're welcome, Dr. Rob.
Sorry, what?
That's my- oh gosh, they're great.
Excuse me, Dr. Rob.